When Lenin and Trotsky decided to dissolve the Duma, Lenin ordered the Red Guard to evacuate the Social Democrats delegates from the Duma and barred the doors of the building of the parliament. It was then that he took the decision to rename his political party into the Communist Party. So the Bolsheviks party came to be known as the Communist Party. Their slogan was peace, land, and bread. And if you think, what did the Russians want? They wanted to quit the war, so they wanted peace. What did people want, including the soldiers? They wanted to eat, they wanted to have food. So peace, land, and bread for the peasants wanted land to cultivate the land and to work. So this was the promise and the slogan they had. So obviously they grew even more in popularity because people started to love the Bolsheviks and they had the status as a national hero because people believed in them. As you know, the two chief actors of this October Revolution, the Russian Revolution, were Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. Vladimir Lenin declared, when he dissolved the Duma, the dictatorship of the proletariat and closed down the Duma. Leon Trotsky obviously was in charge of the secret police of the Red Guard, which came to be known as the secret police. Anyone suspected of speaking against the government was arrested and executed. They provided people more freedom. However, people were not free to absolutely to think independently because, as I told you before, the secret police was in charge of persecuting the ones who thought against the government. The main measures that they took, taking into consideration their slogan, peace, land, and bread, was or were the nationalization of banks, the distribution of land to the peasants. So one of the part of the slogan was being fulfilled, land. He gave workers the control of the factories, so they started to run the factories. That is to say, they could have their own income, bread, and the peasants were free from their landlords and could manage the new lands. So the promise that was missing was peace. What were they going to do? What was the measure Lenin and Trotsky were going to take, the Bolsheviks or the Communist Party was going to take as regards the war? Well, Russia was a multinational territory. Lenin signed a decree giving national minorities the right to form independent countries. So in 1922, Lenin renamed Russia. From 1922 until the Perestroika, it was not Russia anymore. It was the Union of Socialist Soviet Republics, or the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union now had to terminate the war. The one in charge of this termination of war was Leon Trotsky. Trotsky signed an armistice with Germany in order to quit the war, and Russia quit the war. So the promise of peace, land, and bread was being fulfilled. But at what cost did Russia quit the war? It was an enormous cost. Trotsky signed this armistice, which was the terms of this armistice, or this peace treaty, were drastic for Russia. Russia was to oblige to evacuate different territories she had acquired. For example, she was obliged to evacuate Estonia, Finland, to recognize the independence of Ukraine, and to allow the Central Powers, that is to say Britain and France, to decide the status of Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. So the terms of the treaty were drastic, but Russia, or the Soviet Union, quit the war after the Bolsheviks took the power. When war concluded, we have the beginning of another war in Russia. And this is something very important to take into account, because when Russia quit the war, a civil war started in Russia or in the Soviet Union. Why did civil war start? Did civil war start because if you paid attention to what I have just said, banks were nationalized, lands were taken from the landlords and given to the peasants, and factories were given to the workers. So what happened to the capitalists? The capitalists had lost a lot of money and they were worried about that. And not only the capitalists that had invested in factories or the landlords in lands, but also the Central Powers, because Great Britain, France, and the United States especially did not want communism to be spread in Eastern Europe. So they wanted to prevent communism from spreading in Europe. So that is why they also promoted the civil war. The civil war was fought between the Reds, the Bolsheviks, and the reactionaries, who were the Whites. The Whites had the support of the United States and Great Britain, not only in armaments, in weapons, but also in soldiers. So the civil war was a disaster for Russia. And Lenin and Stalin, who was in the Communist Party, who was the secretary, Joseph Stalin of the Communist Party, also got to know that the Whites had the support of the United States and Great Britain. And he is going to remember that at the beginning of the war, so of the Second World War. In order to consider this aspect, so remember, the Whites were the reactionaries supported by the Central Power, United States and Great Britain, and the Reds were the Bolsheviks. They were, obviously, the Whites were defeated by the Red Guard, so the Bolsheviks won, between inverted commas, this civil war, and the result again was a terrible economic crisis. And Lenin, who was in the power, realized that it was time to change the policy of the government, and obviously he adopted a 5-year plan to recover economy, in which there were more changes that I am going to discuss in a few minutes. But when Lenin died, Vladimir Lenin died, there were two candidates to take control of Russia. One was Leon Trotsky, the head of the Red Guard, and the secretary of the Communist Party, Joseph Stalin. There was a complete triumph of Joseph Stalin. Do you remember in Animal Farm, Napoleon and Snowball? Well, Napoleon, Stalin, and Snowball, Leon Trotsky. But this is true story. There was a complete triumph of Joseph Stalin. Trotsky was expelled from the Communist Party, and he was exiled, or he lived in Mexico, and he was persecuted and assassinated in Frida Kahlo's house by the Red Guard, that is to say, by the secret police that he had created, or the Cheka at that time. So, when Stalin takes the power, or took the power, we have the beginning of the third stage of the Russian Revolution. It was a more conservative stage because, as I told you before, Lenin had already decided to change his original plan. So there was a revival of capitalism. This was a disparity of wage payment, that is to say, the wage was again the system of payment to the worker, and it was increased. Women were urged to bear more children. There was a policy because Joseph Stalin was thinking of a following war, and efforts were made to equip Russia or to make Russia a self-sufficient country. That is to say, to have a kind of splendid isolation, something that we are going to study with Great Britain in World War I. Obviously, also Russia was accepted and entered the League of Nations. This is the end of the Russian Revolution with the different stages and how Joseph Stalin became the ruler and the dictator of the Soviet Union, which is the beginning also of something that we are going to study later, World War II. This is the end of Russian Revolution. I am going to come back in our next class with the causes of World War I. See you. Bye-bye.